Welcome to Northern BC Narratives on location. Today, I have with me a gentleman whose stories is so big that it's going to blow up the camera. Sheldon Clare, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you, Zeus.
So tell us about yourself and what you do.
Well, what do I do and what about myself? I'm not that interesting, I'm afraid. I've been teaching at the College of New Caledonia for the last 31 years. Born and raised in Prince George. My parents were fairly involved in the community. My grandfather got here in 1930 and worked with the railroad, was a boilermaker, cobbler, also was a farrier.
Yeah.
We could make things, blacksmithing, and a tin basher too. He was really good and handy, something that didn't carry on to his grandson, I'm afraid. Well, what else have I done? I've been pretty active in the community. I'm active with the Royal Canadian Legion. I chair their meetings for them now. Yeah. I was president of that organization several years ago for 2 terms. And I've also been involved with the Faculty Association at my college and helping them with bargaining. That's been something I've always been interested in, contract negotiations. I was also in the Canadian Forces Reserves as a cadet instructor's cadre officer in the 1980s, and I was on the supplementary reserve up until 2010. Those were all great experiences for me. I learned a lot. When I was growing up, I started hunting with my dad and my brothers. And we'd be out at the lake, go fishing, got a pretty good wholesome lifestyle that way. Joined Army Cadets after finishing up in Cub Scouts and had a pretty good time in the cadet program. So it's been a good life for me. Most recently, of course, I got involved in politics as a candidate. You probably don't want to hear a bunch about that stuff, but it's been an interesting time.
Perfect. So now we're going to go slowly move forward.
Sure.
So talk about your childhood. How was it like? Some of your influences that shape you.
Wow. I feel like I'm on the psychiatrist's couch. Tell me about your mother. Let's see.
No, you don't have to.
Let's see. Childhood. Well, I grew up in Prince George, down in the Crescents. My dad was an owner of the Northern Hardware. He was one of the only non-Moffats who owned was an owner of the Northern Hardware.
Yeah, because I remember it was the Moffats that owned it. We did a whole documentary on that.
Yeah.
And then, but you.
But my dad was also an owner. He was the secretary treasurer from the 1960s forward, and he did that work for many years until pretty close to when he passed away, which is recently. And I like to style myself as kind of been a hardware store conservative in that view, because that working at the hardware store when I was a teenager was a huge influence. Dealing with people, helping solve problems. I think I fixed probably 20 or 30 toilets before I actually went and really fixed one. But I watched what the old guys would tell people, and I would tell people the same thing, and they always came back and thanked me. And then when I had to go and actually fix my own toilet in my own house, that was just basically going through the checklist of what I used to do when I was busy selling toilet valve replacements or toilets or wax bowl rings or anything like that from the hardware side of the Northern Hardware. They were great times, and I remember minimum wages was very low, and we do stock taking, we work out all of those sorts of things, but you learned about all kinds of different items and tools and how people used them and what they wanted them for, and we had everything at that place. It's a terrible shame that the Northern's no longer.
So your father was your boss?
Well, not directly, no. He ran the money upstairs. Okay. He was the nerve center of the place. He kept everybody honest and made sure that the books were all balanced and everybody got paid. And as he told me once, the Northern always made money. He said there were lean times, there were good times, but we always made money.
So was there some kind of a father and son relationship when you were working at that place?
Well, not really. I occasionally would go to coffee with the old coffee gang at the Simon Fraser Inn with Dad and some of the guys, but that wasn't too often.
What's the coffee gang?
Oh, the coffee gang. Well, You know how in many communities there tends to be a cadre or a clique of people who have their fingers in all the pies?
Yeah.
Well, you
Mafia.
well, I wouldn't quite term it that way, Zeus, but it was certainly people who were involved with the businesses in Prince George and politics in Prince George. Yeah. And the interesting thing is it was quite a varied group. You had people who were liberals or conservatives. You had people who were even somewhat to the left of that dropping by occasionally, and they would tease each other. Religion didn't matter. No. You'd have the Protestant Catholic mix in those days was the big thing, and you saw that on the city council. That was the makeup in the 1960s, and I remember as an elementary school child being asked by my teachers and sometimes other students about civic politics, because since my dad was what they called an alderman, or a city councilor at the time. It was great fun. And I really remember fond times out at places like Clucas, where Wumbo family for a while, and then out at Westlake, we had our own cabin next to Herb and Julie Aspin and their family, and the gardens just down the way. Horries, Vikins were even further down the lake. Yeah. And it was great times. Learning to swim, going and having the dogs, getting on the bicycle and riding away all day, coming back for supper or later, chopping wood, bringing in firewood, clearing heavy snowfall off the roof of the cabin. All of those kinds of things were really quite formative and really good times.
Damn, so it seems like you had a really good childhood. So you had a good...
I think that everyone has their own challenges within their families. I think I was pretty fortunate to be in the family I was in growing up. I have a younger sister and two younger brothers. We're not particularly close nowadays. It's a long time ago, but it was a good time growing up, and we had a fair bit of friends out there that we hung around with and did things together. And over time, we'd have different paths we chose and did different things, but it's all good.
So all these people you talked about, even though everybody had different ideologies, they all get along perfectly?
Perfectly? I don't know what perfect means.
But they got along.
People got along well. One story that I remember, and I'm probably getting half of it wrong, but they used to have a thing on the old CJCI radio, CIC 620, I think that's correct, and it was messages to isolated areas. And they would send, you could put a message and have it heard on the radio when you didn't have phones. We didn't have cell phones or telephones at Westlake or any of these other places. Yeah. And my dad was fairly involved with the local Masonic Hall, Masonic Lodge. He was a Freemason and one of the senior ones in Canada, as it turned out when he finished up and passed away. And he had a message from Elroy Garden, who was quite active in the Knights of Columbus and the Catholic Church, and was a fellow city councilor and one of our neighbors at Westlake. And it's funny if you understand the context, but the message was something to the effect of, to the Clares at Shriners Hill from the gardens at Dogan's Hollow, please pick up person of importance and bring to site for festivities. And what this was a message to my dad to pick up a new Catholic priest who was just arriving at the airport from Ireland. And this is in the 1970s, with the troubles in Ireland and all of the tensions that were sadly present there at that time. So my dad, who was quite active in the Anglican Church, went to pick up this new priest. Now, after a few minutes, the priest figured out pretty quickly that dear old dad wasn't a Catholic. And he was a little confused by this, especially when he drives them way out down the Blackwater Road at that time to Westlake. And he gets them to this party where there's clearly a very big mix of backgrounds, politics, religion, and everything else. And everybody's flipping burgers, playing in the boat, kids are all playing together, and the priest looked very confused. And Elroy Garden went up to him and said something. He says, you know, Father, we don't bring those troubles here. We are all friends.
Yeah.
We all like each other.
Yeah.
We have our differences.
Yeah.
But we're all people, and we put all of that aside here. And I was a little kid, and I remember watching and observing this, and I think those kinds of things were quite influential on me as I've done other things in my life, in working with people and having to do roles that involved a fair bit of diplomacy. Carried me through when I was going to the United Nations, for example, representing the National Firearms Association, and having people come up to me as a Canadian and a representative of an organization, an NGO in Canada, but really seen as a representative of my country. And they would have little complaints about how Canada was doing things. Yeah. And I would take them to the Canadian mission, and the Canadian mission always received them very well, even I would say very professionally, to listen to any issue that I raised with them. And it was kind of interesting to see that. Even when Canada was taking positions at the UN which were contrary to the interests of the NGO I was representing, there was always a bit of professional courtesy there, which I thought was quite refreshing. So
that's amazing.
It's always been a pretty good time. So I got a lot of those times catching frogs at Westlake, and finding the occasional garter snake and scaring my sister, and dealing with all the issues that little boys deal with, and getting in trouble from time to time. Dad didn't like to use the belt, but if he had to, boy oh boy, you didn't do that again.
Those things were normal, right? Same. You did something bad, you did punish bad, right?
Well, you had to take responsibility for your actions, Zeus. I think you and I would have shared an upbringing very similar in that respect, that if you were not taking responsibility for your actions, or if you'd done something that you knew to be wrong, then you had to take the lumps for it. And that's something I've always been willing to do. And I found going through the cadet program, going through the reserves program, spending a lot of time at camp, managed to do a fair bit of travel, seeing a bit of the world from those eyes, and seeing the respect that Canada was accorded in the 1970s and 80s and so on for its efforts worldwide. And I'm glad to have been a part of that. I'm very grateful to have that opportunity, and I'm grateful to have had the influences upon me that allowed me to be who I have become.
So Sheldon, we're going to talk a little bit more about childhood, and then we're going to go, to your army and all of that stuff that you know.
Sure.
So did you ever got caught with the firecrackers and things like that?
Oh gosh, yes. One of the things we used to do as a kid, you used to get cap guns, and you'd get those little boxes in the red and white rectangular package that had roll caps, little strip caps. And what we would do is you'd take them out in the street, and you pick up an anvil or a big stone, and you drop it on and watch the whole package go kaboom. And it was loud, and people would freak out, and my mother would go crazy, and there was just no way you could stop little boys from blowing stuff up.
What was the worst time that you got in trouble because of that?
Oh, I wouldn't even want to say. I remember, probably the worst time I ever got in trouble for doing something that was a bad boy thing. And there was a couple times I didn't get caught, which I probably should remain quiet. There's one or two people in town that would know, but I'll tell you about one of these stories that we didn't get caught. It's better. Okay. So we were out at Westlake. We were visiting our friends, the Bulls, down at the end of the lake. We came by boat. And Dale Bull and I were told we had to clean up a bunch of brush and burn it up. So we'd been raking and piling all of these branches and stumps and things like this into this bonfire. And it wasn't a really huge bonfire. Yeah. But like teenage boys do, you get a little bored. And our parents were all in the cabin having coffee and chatting about life, world, politics, and the solutions to everybody's problems. And we had this can of insect repellent.
Oh, wow.
So we took this can of insect, it was an aerosol can of insect repellent, and we made a box out of some little short pieces of 2x4, ends from some project where someone had been cutting, slapped a bit of siding or some plywood on the side of it, and tossed it in the fire. And then we ran and hid behind a wood pile, which was about maybe 30, 40 feet away from this fire. And we sat there with our head in our hands and hunkered over, waiting for it to just go kaboom, because we were pretty sure it was going to go kaboom. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And we waited like 5 minutes. Then we waited 10 minutes. And nothing had happened. And I'm looking at Dale, and he's looking at me, and I just go to start to stand up. And there is this thundering kaboom. And the fire basically disappeared. Like when the can blew, the fire was completely gone. It was flattened. It was like a black spot on the ground. And the can basically had two circles, and the big rectangular piece of metal was completely flat. And it went up in the sky and then came down and landed there. And we were sure that we were going to get our butts spanked. Like we thought, oh my God, when our parents hear this, we are dead. We're so in trouble. They didn't even hear it.
Are you serious?
They didn't hear it at all.
Because the trees probably, but
I don't know how they didn't hear it. Like I have no idea why they didn't hear it, but they didn't hear it, and there was never a consequence for it.
Oh wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was quite a coup, and I mean, it's classic. It's a classic little childhood story about doing something where you could have been in much worse trouble than you were. And I remember burning brush was always a thing out at the lake. We'd have the annual cleaning up of the lot, piling all the detritus, the debris up, and then we'd get some kerosene from the drum in the boathouse. Dad would put that on there, and then we'd watch her burn. And it was always a great time.
You like fire, right?
Well, I think when you live in the north and you live in an environment that's cold, you understand the value of warmth and fire, and it's the old saying, fire is a wonderful servant but a terrible master. And I think you have to have it pretty measured. And I've always gotten used to making sure I've got a means of being able to light a fire. I think Jack London's story, To Build a Fire, when I was in elementary school reading that, and how when you're out in the cold in the winter, how essential a skill it is to be able to build a fire. I carried that through as being a hunter, and somewhat of an outdoorsman, mountaineer for quite a few years. So I was climbing with the Alpine Club when we got that going in Prince George. It's important to be able to have certain bush skills, and that is one of the ones that separates people from the animals, is being able to build a fire.
That's crazy, because that's the most primal survival thing. Like if you're in the cold, you're dead basically. You might as well just right. So
it really is.
So let's talk about, you went into the military, right?
Well, yeah, I didn't do anything really fancy in the military.
What happened that you were interested to go, and then what are some of your experiences?
Wow. Well, I probably have to back up even more, because one of the things I was quite interested in when I was a kid was I liked to listen to bagpipes. And
bagpipes, I love bagpipes. Oh, it's such a soothing sound to it. Like,
it really is.
Every time they come out, I go crazy. It's like my favorite thing.
Fabulous. That's cool. So my parents had two records. One of them was called Scottish Splendor, and the other was Highland Pageantry, and they were both from the Black Watch, the British Black Watch. And I'd put them on the Victrola, the record player, and I would listen to these things over and over again for hours. And my parents detected I had an interest in this, so they got me involved with the local pipe band at the Royal Canadian Legion. And I managed to learn under some really terrific pipers over several years, including Alan Walters and Mark Christie and Ian McGuinness, among others. And I went to piping school in Idaho for summer piping.
How old were you when you started this?
I would have been just 13.
Wow.
By 1975 or so.
Do you have that pipe here?
I didn't bring anything like that here. No, I could run and go grab it. No, it's a skill that I have always treasured. I've never regretted learning the bagpipes, and it's been something that's been a passion for me. And I've been able to play at weddings, memorial services, funerals, parties for people, just for fun. in parades. I played for the Sikh temple for some of their events a few times, and that was a very big thing. And I like the whole military aspect of the bagpipes and all of that. And at the time, I had just left Wolf Cubs in the old first Fort George Cub pack that used to meet in the little building outside of City Hall.
Yep.
And I remember seeing the cadets in the park for one of the royal visits or something. I think it was like 73 or the Centennial of the Mounties, but there was a big visit and I saw the cadets carrying their FN rifles and their flag party, and I looked at that and I thought, that's cool, that's for me, I want to try that. And I got called from Scouts Canada to join Scouts, and I said, I'm sorry, I joined Army Cadets. Yeah. And I got a great greeting in Army Cadets. I remember Corporal Luke Beek, who I haven't seen him in a few years now, but the first person I met when I walked into the basement of I think we were at the Sacred Heart Cathedral, is where we used to meet in the basement down there in those days. And he saw me come in the door, and he went right up to me and welcomed me. You're a new person. Hi, I'm Corporal Beek, and let me show you around. And they got me signed up, and I stuck with the program. Went to summer camp a few times. Managed to get to Europe. Got to the jump course, to my basic parachutist course as an Army cadet.
So when you first walked in,
yes,
and you got greeted, how did you feel, and how did it feel to get a tour? Like, what were you thinking?
Well, and that's really the essence of it, Zeus, is that I felt important, appreciated, and welcome. And I was apprehensive and nervous and probably a little scared when I walked in the door. This is all new, I don't know anybody. All of these folks here are strangers to me. Yep. And my first encounter was someone who understood marketing at the age of about 14. He understood customer service, recruiting, the whole thing at that age. And I thought to myself, wow, okay, if this is the caliber of people that are involved in this, I want to be part of it.
Perfect. So what happens from then on?
Well, I did that for several years. Then,
how were the experiences there?
Going to camp in Vernon was a big thing. I went there for 2-week camps and 6-week camps. I got signed into the reserves at the age of 16 when I was turning 17, parents' permission and all that, to go and be staff at the camp. And this was before they had cadets being staff. They had to sign people into the reserves or have reservists be camp staff. So I went there as a private in the reserves, and I took a training course, and I did very well in that training course, and I ended up as a platoon warrant, and with the rank of sergeant at the end of it, which was quite a surprise to many people, because everybody else was basically, anyone who was carrying that rank was at least in their 20s. So I was quite unusual.
How old were you?
Well, when I got promoted, I was 16.
16?
Yeah, it was the youngest you could be, and we had parents' permission and everything. And I spent a great deal of time that summer trying to be older than I was, which was I even grew a kind of a wispy little mustache, and I remember I had some mascara trying to darken it in. It was just ridiculous. But I was often responsible for people who were my age, sometimes a little older, and certainly younger. And it was quite a big deal for me, certainly. And it was sort of a pilot project to have someone my age do that. And because of that, they started having what they call staff cadets now. But in those days, I was signed into the military as a reservist. I actually went on supplementary reserve after that, which is a call us in case of trouble. I don't remember how long that went for or anything, but it certainly was a big responsibility.
You must have worked really hard to get to that at that young age. So what are some of the things you had to go through to get there? Because,
well, that's a good question.
It sounds beautiful, but I know it's a lot of hard work and extra work probably. So what are some of the things that you have to do to?
Well, we had in the cadet system at the time, they had what they called the STAR program, and Green Star, Red Star, Silver Star, Gold Star, Master Cadet. And I had gotten to the Gold Star thing quite quickly. I was very studious. I didn't find the material particularly onerous. It was for some people. I didn't find it that way. The people learn at different levels. They have different interests. I was very interested, and I just soaked it up like a sponge. And I mean, at the same time, I was interested in bagpipes. The whole military thing fit well for me. I enjoyed it immensely. Met some terrific people that I'm still in contact with, even in my advanced years. And I really got a lot out of it. So I remember when I was one of the top candidates in BC for the Gold Star, and I wasn't the top, but I was up there. And they said to me, "Well, what do you want to do?" Now, most of the people I was peers with, they were older than me. Most of them were aging out. They were 18 or so on, and they would be going to do one of the plum courses. So you could go to Europe. You could go to Outward Bound Wales. You could go to the parachutist course. And I looked at the warrant officer and I said, "Well, I want to take the basic parachutist course. I want to jump out of airplanes." And he goes, "Well, you have to be, you have to be older. We're not going to let you do that because you're only 16." And I said, "Okay. Well, then I'd like to go to Europe." And he goes, "Well, you have to be older to do the thing to Europe because you're not old enough yet. So that's not an option." And I said, "Okay, Warrant. Well, I've highlighted what I'm interested in. You said I can do anything I want. And you keep saying no. What can I do?" And he said, "Well, you could go to Banff National Army Cadet Camp for the Mountaineering Leadership and Challenge course and spend the summer mountain climbing. Or you could be going to Vernon, has a summer call-out staff." And I thought, well, I thought I had to be older. And he said, "Well, we're going to try something this year, and if your parents agree, we'll sign you on. You go to the camp, you take a course, you might end up as a section commander, and or you're a clerk or something." I was quite young, so realistically, I thought I'll be a company clerk. And I had people from my unit going there who in my unit were sergeants. I was a lance corporal at the time. And when I got there, I did really, really well. And I remember a seminal moment when I was in a map and compass lesson, and I had always done very well with map and compass. And we had a regular Army warrant officer who was teaching us a map and compass lesson, no names, no pack drill. But he was teaching us concave and convex slopes, and he had it backwards.
So what are this? What is convex and concave?
Well, when you're looking at ground topography, there are types of slopes that are very steep at the top, and then they get more flat at the bottom. And we call that a concave slope. And then you have a convex slope, which is more rounded. And you have it sort of rounded at the top, and it's like more like a ball, but with a more gentle slope to the bottom. And he had labeled the concave slopes as convex and the convex slopes as concave, and he was explaining it completely backwards. Now, there were 45 or 50 of us in this room.
Nobody said anything.
And nobody said a word. And I'm looking at this, and I know it's wrong. Like, I know it. I'm looking at this, and I'm going, he's wrong. How come nobody is saying anything? And I look around, and these people, some of them who are already corporals in the primary reserve in different regiments, but they're coming as camp staff, and they're being reassessed and could be promoted to acting rank. And I just couldn't take it. I don't know. Maybe I have some kind of ADHD or something. I don't know, but I had to put up my hand, so I put up my hand, and the warrant officer said yes, and I said, and I was trying to be so diplomatic. I said, warrant officer, I was always taught that a concave slope was sort of like a cave, and a convex slope was flexed, like your arm. Like you have flex your arm, and you get the bulge there. Right? And he goes, "Well, where did you see that?" I said, "Well, it's actually in the map and compass training manuals." He says, "Is that the cadet books?" And I go, "Well, yes, Warrant." And he said, "The cadet books are wrong." And I sat back, and I went, "Oh, okay." So I put my pen down, I closed my book, and I put my hands in my lap. Because at that point, I thought I can learn nothing that I haven't just learned from this man. And I'm 16. I'm the youngest guy in the room. And a few minutes later, this warrant officer who was assessing the class, Davies, I believe her name was, Warrant Davies, she came sauntering up to me and she said, "What was that you were saying about slopes?" And my eyes went wide and I looked at her and I had a little crown on her collar and I looked at her and my only thing I could think of is, "You don't know? Like you don't like look at that and know it's wrong?" And so I opened up the book. I showed her the diagram. I pointed at the board. I showed her the other diagram. I pointed at the board, and it was clearly backwards. The book isn't wrong. So she said, "What's your name?" And I was like, "Oh,
I'm getting kicked out.
oh no,
You're like,
I'm in such trouble now." And I never heard another thing about it until promotions parade, and then they handed me 3 hooks, and I was what, 3? I'm a platoon warrant. Wow, because my corporals were older than I was, and we were responsible for about 45 cadets. And I had a platoon commander who was like 21 or 22, something like that. And I was to be the disciplinarian. I was to be the drill master. I was that guy for that summer platoon. And now there was a junior company. We had the 3 or 2. I think we had 2 intakes of 2 weekies, if I remember correctly. And then and it changed after that. But I remember getting shoved in the shoulder by one of my friends, and he goes, "Clare, you're a sergeant."
wow.
And I was like, "No way." And I served with 2 really great guys, Tommy Burke and Kevin Donovan. One was 8CH, and the other was an engineer, if I remember. And I think both of them went on to the regular army, unlike me, because I didn't do that.
How old were you at the time?
At that time, when I was 16.
Okay.
I turned 17 that summer.
When you got all that awards and things, right?
Pardon me?
When you got promoted, right?
Yes.
So, how did it feel to get because
I was shocked.
like worried, like okay, just talk about it.
I expected I would be a company clerk as a corporal. I'd be a corporal, and since I was so young and had all these guys who were really smart and capable, that I would be at best a section commander. I was hoping I could be a section commander, and I did not expect to be a platoon warrant. And that was really quite a shock. And it was a big shock to one of my my friends from Prince George, who was also there from my same unit, because back home he was what we called then a staff sergeant. But at summer camp, he made the grade to be a corporal, a section commander. And back home, he ranked me by quite a bit. And he came up to me after promotions and he wanted to see me and he said, "Don't think this changes anything." And the first thing I said to him is, I said, "Corporal, get your heels together." So there was, I don't know if you've ever seen that series Sharp's Rifles, where Sharp is bearding Colonel Girdwood in his den, and basically he knows he's got him, and he basically puts him under arrest and hauls him away. But that moment was really quite something, and I almost messed it up because I was so excited. Like after it sunk in that what was going on, I went and got my bagpipes out and I started playing the bagpipes. And the band officer saw me playing the bagpipes, and I hadn't said anything about playing bagpipes because I did not want to be in band company. I wanted to be in one of the training companies that wasn't band. And he saw 3 hooks and he saw a set of bagpipes and he goes, "You're in band." And I go, "I forget how to play." That was probably one of my greatest summers. That was the summer of troopers, boys in the bright white sports car. There was some interesting stuff. There were some sad things that happened. There was one of the staff got hit by a car and was killed. Kilbore, I believe her name was. It was a really sad time, but it was a great opportunity living down there in Vernon for those few months that I was there doing that job, and with all the responsibility that came with that. So, and then after the cadet program ended, I joined the Canadian Forces Cadet Instructors List, as it was then called. Now it's Cadet Instructors Cadre. Has a reserve officer, an officer cadet for a couple of years, and carried on through that. But I mean, I'd done the other things I mentioned earlier in the cadet program as well. And I worked at summer camp while I was going to university, doing my bachelor's degree in international relations, and at UBC, and then looking for other career opportunities. I had other ideas about what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go with my my career. I thought that it would be really cool to become involved in the intelligence diplomatic type community. I wanted to be a diplomat, so I wrote the Foreign Service exam a number of times, and then I found out that there were certain political considerations that governed who got into the Foreign Service, regardless of how well you did on the Foreign Service exams.
Yeah.
And I knew people who were accepted, and I was going, how did you get accepted? And it would be, well, my dad's a diplomat, and we wrote at the embassy in Australia, and I was like, okay, now I understand.
They got selected, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
Selection.
And it was all fun. I looked to go regular Army, too, and I went to COWSOB, the Combat Arms Officer Selection Board in New Brunswick, in Gagetown, and while we were in the middle of it, we got an interview from this major. He came into the room and he says, gentlemen, I have some good news and I have some bad news. He said, the good news is you've all been accepted. The bad news is there's this thing called the Forces Reduction Plan. And we are not allowed to hire combat arms officers this year, so you'll be given different offers. And I was offered to be an air weapons officer, and I turned it down. I said, I'm not going to wear blue. I like green. So I turned that down. I stuck with the cadet program for a little bit after that, went on supplementary reserve. Got involved with starting the Rocky Mountain Rangers.
Let's talk about some of the stuff that you're talking about. You're going so fast. Let's talk about some of the experience. Let's open them up one by one, because I want to know how you got to this point right now.
Sure.
So you finish when you were 16. What happened after that? And then what were some of the experiences?
Okay.
So slowly just...
Well,
because I know there's a lot of good stuff in there, right?
I got accepted for an exchange to Hawaii.
Hawaii?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. You're a lucky guy.
Yeah, we had an arrangement with the U.S. Marine Corps JROTC of Snohomish, Washington.
Yeah.
They got to go to Vernon, and we got to go to Hawaii.
That's so much better, right?
Now, they got to go to Hawaii too, but as part of the deal to be able to accompany them, that was what we did. And that was very interesting. We were doing training with CS and CN gas, training on the U.S. military small arms, touring around in the helicopters, seeing the sights, hitting the beach. It was pretty cool.
Let's talk about some of those experiences.
Yeah.
Because again, were you surprised when you got there? What was the training like? Also, like, was it very difficult or like?
Well. One of the misconceptions about military training is that it's really, really difficult. Military training is designed that most people will be successful, except for more elite type programs. And there are things that there are people who are just not going to be successful because of outlook or whatever else. And I remember they would push you, and it wasn't so much physically. There was physical, of course. There was a physical standard you had to meet. But often it was mental. And I remember we had been training very hard for our workups for Europe. And we were in Petawawa, Ontario, and Mattawa Plains, up for a few days, no sleep, going to the rifle ranges.
No sleep for a few days?
You'd be sleep deprivation for 2-3 days.
How did that feel? Like, would you feel like?
It wasn't the most pleasant experience, and I don't recommend it. And because it affects your decision making, and it affects your ability to stay awake. I got tons of stories I could go on and about issues about being on sentry duty or being responsible for a section. And you go up and check on everybody, and they're all asleep because they've been up for two days straight, and everyone's exhausted. They've been digging holes and filling them in, or running, and you're shaking everybody awake and saying, "Look," and you got to.
And you're tired yourself, right?
Oh, and you're tired yourself. It's just unbelievable, but it's intended to see where your breaking point is, and everybody finds their breaking point. And how you deal with that is what makes the difference.
What was your breaking point?
Well, what would be my breaking point? I think when the closest I came to really breaking was, and it was close, and I think everybody was there because we'd been running for a few days. We've been not with a lot of sleep. We were on the range. One relay was in the butts. One relay was practicing camouflage and running, and the other relay was shooting. And it was exhausting. And we'd been doing that kind of thing all day. And we knew this was the last day of this training we were doing. And we all formed up to go back to the base. And the trucks were there to take us back. And we had this warrant officer from the Airborne Regiment there. And he goes, "Well, gentlemen, do you see those trucks?" And we all went, "Yes, warrant." And he says, "Do you know where those trucks are going?" "Yes, warrant." And he goes, "They're going back to base." And "So are you, but you're not taking the trucks." And he waved, and the trucks all drove away. And we watched them drive down the road, and they turned right, and they went off into the woods, and they were gone. And we knew that it was a long ways back to the base. It was kilometers. I don't remember, 10, 20. I can't even remember how far it was, but it was a long ways. And you could see the morale just suck out of everybody's body and mind. They were just like, "Oh no." And I thought to myself, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I want this. I can do this. Yep. And we all had webbing, which is like a suspenders carrying little pouches with basic gear. We didn't have packs at that time that I remember. I don't think we had our packs, but we had our rifles. We had to carry our rifles, our webbing, and a bit of weight with this. And so we lined up, and he had these, I can only call them like sharks or barracudas, these master corporals who are the Airborne Regiment directing staff or drill instructors who were with us. And they would run circles around us while we were running. It was unbelievable. And this warrant officer who has my build now, he had a good sized gut on him. He could run like a gazelle. It was unbelievable. It was shocking to me. So they started us running. And it wasn't like a very fast pace. It was like what they call a shuffle. And they're run, run, run. And we started down to the corner. We'd gone maybe 500 meters. And a couple of guys in there threw their rifles down and said, "I'm done." And the Jeep that was following us picked them up, grabbed their gear, scooted around the corner, and we never saw them again. They were gone. They got sent back home or whatever. And when we ran around the corner, there were the trucks waiting for us. And I know everybody in that group was just thinking, when am I going to be? And that's probably the closest I've come.
So it was a trick, basically, right?
Yeah, it was a trick to see
who was going to give up.
Who would give up when things seemed to be most bleak. And they used to do things like take us on a run, and you'd think, okay, you do a circuit. Yep. You start at the gym. You run down to the river, to the beach. You run down through the roadway and the trails, and you get back to the gym. But they'd run past the gym, and sometimes we do the whole thing again. And sometimes, and there were times you were just like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Yeah. But you just did, and you relied very heavily on the support of your friends to carry you forward. It's a team, right? You don't get to do it by yourself. You have to have your basics. You have to have your attitude. And your attitude, like there were guys who were pretty thin and scrawny who did really well just because they had the right attitude. And there were other guys who were big and tough and burly, and some of them just couldn't do it because they didn't have the attitude. So it didn't matter so much about that. As long as you had the basic physical fitness and you had the right attitude, the attitude was, I thought, more important.
Such amazing, I'm getting such insights to this, right? It's like the whole thing is so amazing. So what else happened after some of that stuff?
Well, let's see. I got to Germany and did the Reforger exercises for
How was Germany?
Oh, it was fabulous. I probably learned a lot. I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about the military formations, the how we did things. I got a great appreciation for Europe. Yeah. And
how was it different to Canada when you were there?
Oh, wow. Well, it was in those days, during the days of the Cold War. Yeah. This was when I was there was the time of the Polish crisis, and maybe going to the West German plain and doing the invasion and all of that. Everyone was very, very tense. Yeah. The Spetsnaz will be coming. They'll be doing this. Lots of chit chat among the soldiers that were there, and everybody was pretty tense about that stuff. We had gas training in the field. They hadn't done that in decades. Wow. It was pretty exciting times, and I remember we got evacuated as casualties when we were finally finished our summer training, but we were fully integrated with the infantry in the 3 RCR and 4th Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group. We participated in exercises with the Americans and with the Germans. The German people were wonderful, truly wonderful. They very much appreciated our presence there. I remember people coming up and handing us bread and sometimes wine to us on our carriers when we were driving through the streets of their small villages. You felt like you were liberating the place every day. And it's not. It was a peacetime army, and it was quite something.
So you said you learned a lot about people when you were there.
Oh yeah.
What are some of the things you learned from people, about people?
Well, I learned a lot about reliance and teams and how important it was to get along in a group when you were in close proximity for long periods of time. I mean, these trips were you're out in the field for weeks or months at a time on these kinds of things, and you saw some bad sides of people in some respects. When we were in the camp before we got put into the battalion and waited for some of the guys to come back from the field, you're experiencing some of the nightlife and experiences in Europe, and you're looking at this and you're going, this doesn't really fit with my sense of morality or my background, and I'm a little confused to see the differences in how people react in these different situations when they're interacting with some of the local populace or some of the women folk who are left behind. And I looked at that and I thought, some of that stuff I'm pretty uncomfortable with what I'm seeing here. Some of the different cultural differences, like in Europe, you can, as a teenager, you can legally drink in the public at 16.
16.
For things like beer or what they call radlers, which is like an alcoholic soft drink. It's like what we would call a shandy, and then hard liquor is a little bit older. And they don't seem to have any significantly higher rates of alcoholism or anything like this. It just seems to be
cultural thing.
A cultural difference. One thing I saw on a trip many years after all of that was I went to a medieval festival with my then wife and our kids, and there were 2 of the German Polizei who were watching an archery competition during their lunch break. And they're all in their uniforms, their pistol and everything like that, and they've each got a nice mug of beer, and they're drinking their beer and watching the archery competition. And I think I took a picture of it because it was such a cultural shock for me. And over there,
you don't care.
That's, a beer at lunch is fine. Like 2 or 3, probably not.
Yeah.
But I've run into this with Europeans before. They say, well, at lunch I have a beer. And business, work, whatever you're doing, doesn't matter. It's one beer, right? And that would be national news in Canada. If you had 2 police officers having a beer on Canada Day at the park, while everybody out, in public and everything, that would be national news here. It would be a huge furore. They'd want to off with their heads. Stuff would be going on. Over there, nobody even looks. It's not a thing. It's not an issue. And I thought it was how alcohol is treated over there was quite different as a cultural difference. I found people were often a bit aloof, but once you got to know them, you were completely welcomed. Yeah. I got married in Germany.
Got married in Germany?
Yes, I did. Back in '99, and I remember when we had kind of a reception party in Mainz, which is where my then wife was from.
Yeah. Where did you propose?
In Germany.
Okay. Yeah. What part? Was it like a castle? Was it like a?
It was in her apartment, I think. Yeah, but anyway, that all was all well and good then, and not so much later. But we had 2 lovely daughters, and they're great girls, Elise and Danielle. They're 21 and coming up on 21 and 18 now. They're really good kids. I'm quite proud of them.
Have your kids got involved in military at all, or no?
No,
Okay, good. I just wanted to.
Oh, no. They got involved in biathlon. I got the family involved in cross-country skiing because my philosophy is about winter is you embrace it or you suffer it. So I've always chosen to embrace it. I've gone ice climbing, skiing, cross-country, downhill. I really like to get out and enjoy that. Snowshoeing sometimes too. We did a lot of that at Westlake, that or cross-country skiing growing up. And I wanted my family to be able to do that too. So I got everybody going on cross-country skiing. We got involved with the club out at Otway, the Caledonian Nordic Ski Club. And my daughters have been on skis since they were 6 and 3, basically.
Wow, you start them early so they don't, right?
Well, they have no fear. I can hardly keep up to them now when I'm downhill skiing.
Are you serious?
Oh, they're fast. Like my youngest, until she found out you could actually go fast, get speed by turning, she would just point the skis downhill and go. And that would be over everything. And so you can get some pretty high speeds. And when you're closer to the ground, when you're smaller, it's not so bad when you fall down. But when you get taller, it hurts about a lot more.
Sometimes you explode.
Exactly. Yeah.
Your brain, just like your eyes, everything is moving in that hit, right? It's just crazy. So what happened after the Germany? So what are some of the other experiences that you had?
Well, I did the military basic parachutist course.
Oh, you did a parachute?
Yeah, I did the 7 jumps out of a C-130.
How was the experience in that? Because I know a lot of people they don't like heights, right? So
well, I'm not big on heights either, but I'm
were you like, oh my God, I'm gonna die? Oh, you're looking
Nope,
down.
no,
How was your feeling? Because some
you know,
people, they get the cat, obviously.
it's funny. They train you really well. Military parachutists, paratroopers are very well trained in Canada, and we've got a great system, parachute training center. Now, we did a pre-training course in Petawawa, Ontario, for I think it was 3 weeks or so. And basically, they're putting you through the ringer physically and mentally to see if you can do things. And lots of obstacle courses, lots of PT.
That's even before you go on to
before you go to what they call J stage, or when you're doing your actual parachute training. So we had instructors that were very rigorous, and we had a lot of people that were not successful. I think we started with 60, and we whittled that down to something like 38, 45, something like that. There were a few who didn't make it at jump stage because they just weren't predisposed to jump, and nothing against them. It doesn't mean you're big or strong or smarter or better than anyone else. That when you're willing, it might mean you're just crazier than other people when you jump out of an airplane. I don't know. But it does mean that you've been able to conquer a fear inside yourself, and that you know that everyone else who is jumping out of a plane has also conquered that fear. And there's a certain bond between people who have been able to jump out of an airplane when they've had to trust people. They have had to trust people to pack the parachute. They've had to trust that somebody checked their lines and everything was working, and that this isn't a big joke. I remember thinking, almost for the whole thing, that nobody was actually really going to jump out of an airplane, and the whole thing was just a big joke, and someone at some point was going to go, ha, 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 we were just kidding. And I just kept thinking that all the way through. Because I guess it was a way of me coping with the idea that I was actually going to have to jump out of a plane, and I was quite enthusiastic about it, because you don't get assigned to do this. You have to volunteer. Nobody pushes you out of the plane. You jump or you don't jump. If you refuse to jump, you don't get to go again. You're done. So it relied very heavily on people, again, supporting each other, helping each other through. There's bonding stuff that goes on. People remember, one night we had a toga party, or we had nothing to drink the whole time we were there. It was not allowed. We were under so much threat of being sent home at the slightest excuse, that everybody tried to be on their best behavior. And anybody who was at some of that stuff will always remember it. And it was pretty interesting. Running at night, singing songs, waking up generals. It was like, oh my gosh. We had one master corporal, and he got into a lot of trouble because I think he had been out on the town, and he decided to take us for a run at 2 in the morning for a 10-kilometer run, and some of us were barefoot.
Barefoot?
Oh yeah, it was not good.
Why barefoot? Why they didn't?
Well, because he made us run as we were when we got up. If you didn't have, like, I think I threw my shoes on because I was, and we didn't have much else. It was like, and he took us for this run, and the next morning, the MPs came and they wanted to interview us about him because he was in trouble, and not one of us said anything, but we had made him take us for a run.
Just, oh my God. So because you couldn't get a trick, right? That's what you're thinking, right?
Well, that was teamwork.
Yeah.
That was that, and you know what? It didn't matter. The next day he came and he took us for 3 runs, and you know, and he was.
This guy was like.
Oh, he became. I wish I could remember his name exactly, but he was a French guy from 1 Commando Airborne Regiment, and he became a warrant officer because I saw something about him in a magazine years later, and he had been running for charity to raise money for some sort of a kids charity or something, and he had a huge reputation for being this amazing runner. And I said, I know all about his reputation as a runner. I've seen it firsthand. But yeah, that was a great experience too. And then getting to Edmonton for the jump training J stage and jumping out of the mock tower.
So how was it, the experience? Tell me.
Wow.
When the doors open.
Well, the wind comes in, everything's blowing.
What were you thinking? Like,
well,
tell me the experience. Like,
I think if you're not the first person in line, you feel like you're in a tube of toothpaste. Because you go through the light. What happens is the light turns red. They've got you stand up, hook up, check static lines, sound off for equipment check, and then you slap each other on the butt. And you're okay, because you check everyone's lines. Then you turn around at the front. They check each other, and you're standing there, inboard foot leading. You're holding your static line. You're jumping maybe 1,500, 2,000 feet, not very high. Wind's blowing around. You're looking at the red light on the door. Well, if you're jumping and in the Hercules, you jump either side or off the ramp. And I think I was like, I don't have my log with me, but I think I was 3rd or something for one of the early jumps. And I just watched the guys in front of me go out the door. And I went, wow, we're actually doing this. And you slap it, you do exactly what they taught you. You drive your foot in, you go into this, what they call the jab position. You have your hands on the side of your reserve chute. You form like an L. You fall down. Your little cord breaks. The parachute comes out, and all of a sudden you're floating. And it's the most. You go from having this feeling of apprehension to this feeling of euphoria in the space of a few seconds. That's about the only way I can describe it. All of a sudden you're floating like the birds. Birds are going by, you can hear everything, you can see everything, and it's just amazing. Probably the most apprehensive I was when I was picked to be the first on the ramp jump. It was like, they called it the biggest TV screen in NATO. The ramp would come down, and you'd walk out to the edge of the ramp, and I was holding my line, and I'm right there at the front. The jump master's got his hand in front of me. I'm looking at the light, and I'm thinking to myself, this is another test. And if I am the example for everyone behind me, everybody sees me, and I was more afraid of letting them down than I was of jumping out of the back of that airplane, I think.
Wow,
that's
amazing.
So the light goes green, I slap the static line forward, and pound my foot in and jump. And I could remember the jump master's hand going down, and he almost spun me a little bit. And when I got to the bottom, and when I talked to them later when we were doing our debriefing, the jump master said to me, he says, Claire, I thought you were going to take me with you. You got out of there so fast. And I thought I was there for hours, standing there. For me, it was all in slow motion. For him, I was, and I remember looking behind me, and I had a huge gap between me and ones that were behind me, because it's usually very regular. But he said, yeah, you were gone. He said, you were out of there so fast, I couldn't believe it. And I was like, wow, that was amazing. I have a picture in my photo album of me just before my first jump, and I'm like this. And then I have a picture of me just before my second jump. and I'm like this. and you could see the whole, what just happened and is this happening again look. So that was certainly a real formative time for me, knowing that being nervous about heights, that was something I could overcome. And I mean, I took that into things like ice climbing and mountaineering, being on some pretty steep, sketchy places, taking groups up places like Mount Edith Cavell, or going up like Mount Athabasca, Snow Dome, Resplendent, to name a few of them.
Let's talk about some of the climbing that was almost dangerous.
I've had some very close calls in climbing.
Let's talk about some of them, because you're going from height.
Ooh, well, I've done some stupid things in climbing. Usually there are things around being dumb with how your equipment is. And one of the things in jumping, parachuting, it's all about equipment not failing. And I experienced an equipment failure in that at one point, which was one of the release rings breaking when we were doing landing swing practices. And I got a bad mark on gear because of that, because I think the captain, he cut his finger. And I had complained about it, but nobody wanted to change it. It was all silliness. But getting to the climbing aspect of things, that life, I've had a couple of close calls.
What was the most craziest one that you shiver when you think about?
Well, there's probably about 3 or 4 like that. But I've got 2 that I can I'll come up with. So I was with a couple of buddies of mine who'd been in cadets with me. We were hanging around down in Vancouver Island, down at Upana Caves near Gold River. And we went into one of the caves, and we were playing around in the cave, and we came out into this wonderful little open air grotto with a waterfall and a pond. There was some rock formation sticking up. Now, this isn't in the cave, this is outside. And we decided this was a great place to have lunch. And I thought it might be fun to climb beside the waterfall, like this rock climb up the waterfall. Because it wasn't really high. It was maybe, 20 feet, something like that. And so I climb up the side of the waterfall, and I go to do this fancy move on this big rock, a rock probably about the same area as this table, maybe a little wider. And usually when you're climbing, you want at least 3 points of contact. Feet are great, hands are okay, but you want 3 points while you're making moves. So I had a weight move, I had my hands on the rock, I went to do a weight shift, so the weight shift went from foot to hands to the next foot as I'm shifting over to get around this little obstacle, and the whole rock broke off in my hands. Now, right below me, about 3 feet out from the wall, was a pillar of rock about 6 inches in diameter that stuck up out of the water about a foot. And I was falling backwards into the water. And I knew it was there, and I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. And I remember hitting the water, and this rock was right in between my thighs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I don't know how this worked or how this happened, I was only wet on the bottom half of my clothes when I jumped up out of the water. It was about thigh deep, because I hit the water and jumped up right away, but my back half was wet and my front half was dry, except on my legs below my thigh. Because I reacted so quickly. And my buddy who was going to climb up after me decided not to. And the guy who wasn't going to climb at all just looked at the both of us like we were nuts. Another time I had a close call was ice climbing out at Willow River. And, there was a couple ice climbing close calls. One of them, a whole icicle just broke off right beside me. The icicle looked identical to the one I was on. It was late season when ice starts to break up.
How big was it?
Maybe 40 feet long.
40 feet long ice?
Yeah, probably about this big around at the top.
And it broke next to you?
It broke right next to me. And I was on the one that was a parallel one to it.
Oh, what happened? What do you feel like when you saw that happening? You're like, okay, that's it, I'm done? Or like, what were you thinking? What were the thoughts in your head?
You pretty much summed it up right there. It went and broke off, and it went right into the river and disappeared, as if it was nothing. And I thought, oh my God, I'm on this icicle, and
I've got to either get up this last little 10 feet of this right now fast, because this is going to break off next. I'm surprised it didn't break off.
Yeah.
And I powered my way up and out, gone. And that was it for the season.
Did it break off?
No, not then. Probably maybe the next day, maybe half an hour later. I don't know. We were gone. We were done for the day. After you see that, you're finished. So that was pretty scary. I've had a couple of other little things like that are, you think that was me being stupid, or I should have looked and checked it. And it's made me very careful.
Yeah.
Because I know when I was taking groups out on trips with the Alpine Club or friends on mountaineering trips, I would be kind of like the mother hen. I'd be watching everybody and checking. And I remember one friend of mine, we were on the ice fields one time. He was taking all these pictures. He was a great photographer and a really good doctor too. And he was getting a little annoyed with me because I was constantly saying, well, keep the ropes tight and watch out for this or watch out for that. And anyway, he was backing up to take a picture, and he hadn't seen this crevasse that was right there. And I said to him, oh, look, you better look out. And he said, I'm getting tired of you telling me blah, 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 blah. And I said, look behind you. And he looked down there, and he was literally about to step into this hole. And he goes, I'm so sorry. He says, I'll never criticize you trying to be safe again. Because I think one of the things that my background in cadets, background in the military, all of that, and Alpine Club stuff taught me is when you're dealing with a group of people and you're doing something that has an inherent risk associated with it, it's really important for everybody to feel comfortable in speaking up and saying something. So typically what I would say, if I'm going hunting, or if I'm going climbing or on a hike or anything, I would say something like this. Zeus, we're going to go do something that's got some risks associated with it. And we don't know each other really well, but I want you to feel completely welcome if you see me doing something that you have a concern about. If you think I'm doing something that might be dangerous, or that you're concerned about the time or anything like that, please feel welcome to speak up and say something. Are you good with that? And then typically the response is, well, yeah, of course. And I said, no, furthermore, please don't be offended if I ask you about something you're doing, and I just want to point out something about safety. And when you're in the parking lot talking about this, before you go anywhere, everybody buys in. And it makes it so much easier for someone to say something when they're thinking.
That's for safety, right?
Yeah, for safety. And I've always found that a great formula.
So it's good communication, right? So there's
communication is the key.
So after military, so what are some of the other things that you've done?
Well, concurrent with the military, I was going to university at UBC for an international relations degree.
International relations?
Yeah.
Why international relations?
Well, I was interested in becoming a diplomat.
Right?
I wanted to be in the foreign service. I wanted to, be doing that interesting kind of thing, see the world, travel, solve problems, help people. I thought that would be an interesting career. And so I geared my interest towards that. And then I thought, okay, well, this diplomat stuff isn't working out. Maybe I'll go regular Army. That didn't work out because of the forces reduction plan stuff. Because I wanted to be an infantry officer, or infantry is what I wanted to do, and that didn't pan out. And so I then thought, well, maybe I can get into the security intelligence service stuff. I tried doing that kind of thing as well, and that didn't open up for me. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to go into teaching. And I started substitute teaching. I did that for 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah, School District 57.
What were you teaching?
I was K to 12, anything kindergarten to grade 12. I did power on shop at a couple of the high schools. I taught at the jail, the Youth Containment Center, intensive child care resource, when that was a program run under the Lions Club, Lions Quest, for kids that were in need of a lot of attention and support. We had 3 staff, 8 kids. That tells you what we were.
3 staff, 8 kids.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was intense. I had to break up the occasional fight.
What were some of the experiences?
A lot of that I can't talk about because of the kids and everything.
What are some of the positive experiences?
Well, seeing some of the folks who've gone through the program be successful in their lives later and coming and thanking me.
Okay, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's all you want as a human being, right?
Well, yeah, and I've seen that in my professional career as a college instructor as well. I've usually tried to pay extra attention to people who are having a problem, or who are doing well but maybe needed a little guidance, and seeing them succeed has always been
What is the reason for that? Why? Because most teachers, they don't do that. They're like, oh, okay, he's not doing good. Let's give him a bad mark and let's get rid of him, right? So.
Well, there are people who work hard to get bad marks, but there are others who, with their circumstances in their lives, through no fault of their own, who are trying, they become overwhelmed, and they need a little extra help. I mean, I've had students over the years come to my office telling me they wanted to withdraw from all the classes, and I've literally torn up their withdrawal papers signed by everybody else, told them to go up and tell their teachers they made a mistake and they're going to finish the course and the program. I've had that happen, and I've seen people go and finish the program and succeed, and I really like that. I've had others who I've seen who had great minds and needed more challenge, and needed more connection to be able to maximize the things they're doing. And I've seen some of them just fall by the wayside, and I've seen others who've gone on to greater things. But I was like that. I always like to see students succeed, because I think, it's probably quite selfish, but I think that reflects on me as much as it does on their willingness to take responsibility and move forward and work. And I mean, you're always trying to assess what kind of risks you're taking when you're teaching. How far can you push people? And I got this from my military stuff, because I got pushed a lot to be something and someone who would excel. And I benefited a lot from being pushed. And when you're in a classroom, you don't have the same abilities to do those kinds of pushes on people. So you try to challenge their preconceptions, their prejudices, and you make them defend them or think about alternative points of view. And maybe they will see the world with a broader perspective. And I've had people who argued with me. I love it when people argue with me. It's great fun. I will argue frequently, apparently contrary positions. Like one class, I might argue about this. But I've found in recent years, I've had to be more and more arguing against popular narrative. Because popular narrative has become quite destructive, in my view, of Western civilization. And so I've been forced to be a bulwark against some of the destructive influences by challenging the preconceptions that I'm meeting in class about the various political agendas of the day. And sometimes that goes over well, and sometimes it doesn't.
It's good when it doesn't go well, because then people ideologies changes, right? That's when actually people start to say, oh, like they get shocked so much in their heads that some things opens up in there, right? So.
Well, you have that aha moment. And I mean, I'm not there to change people's minds per se. I'm there to try to give them the opportunity to think about why they have the positions they do, and why other people have the positions they do. And to consider that different people can take completely different points of view on the same information. And why is that? And some of the exercises I do in my courses are about having someone read parts of one book and compare it with parts of another book, which are about the same thing, but come to different conclusions. And people get confused by that, because many people want to believe what they read. They want to trust. They want to anchor to something. They don't want to have to think too much. And what that does is it forces them to think, because I try to ask them, which one do you agree with and why? Or is there another position? And there always is another position. And so I get a lot of enjoyment out of watching these younger minds wrap themselves around some of the challenges that I and my colleagues in education throw at them.
That's beautiful. And everything is so sugar-coated now, right? So, like, you don't know what you're getting sometimes.
Well,
right? Sometimes they make something horrible look so beautiful, and you think, oh, it's such a great idea. But then when you go deeper inside of it, you say, oh man, that's horrible.
Well-
it's coated in a way that is beautiful.
Zeus, and I think a big problem we have in our society now is we have so much access to information,
Overload.
but we don't have access to quality information.
Yeah.
And we have superficial attitudes about accepting what we see and hear. And I see people all the time who are prepared to accept very superficial information because it's been commonly circulated
Yeah.
that has as fact, when if you looked into it in any significant depth, you'd find out that this has got some
horrible.
problems. There are aspects of what they're believing to be so that are palpably not so. And the use of the cell phone, the Google tool as information, people relying for everything they know about anything. And of course, the destruction of popular media, which has occurred over the last 20 years or so, media has become much more interested in ratings, selling advertising, and not providing investigative journalism. They're relying on the same story from the same wire services. And it no longer has the critical analysis that used to be the case in media, in many aspects of media.
It's more of entertainment now, right? Whatever story comes, they just put it out so to get the hits and things. But it's the same thing with everybody. You know, if you look at like TikTok, YouTube, all this stuff, like even the influencers,
It's all superficial.
Everybody's doing this superficial stuff, which doesn't mean anything, doesn't do anything for the planet.
It
right?
doesn't
So-
better Western civilization. It doesn't better the planet generally. And it's often coded as if it does.
Yeah.
Like it's a very globalist view of we're all the same. No, we're not.
No.
We're you know.
We're similar to
Yeah.
some stuff, but nobody's the same.
No, and there are significant differences in philosophy, ideology, how one views things like currency, money, and just morality. And when you see these changes having such an effect on people and them willingly accepting superficial information from their cell phones or their computers, it really is a challenge to try to get people to be more critical about what they are listening to and what they're told.
You know, in some cultures, right, they encourage thinking. Like they force you actually to sit and think about things. Like it's part of the culture. You have to think deep about things. Even the arts, right? Even like, you know, when you want to paint something, for example, right?
Yep.
You're encouraged to sit and think about it multidimensionally in many levels. So when you paint, right, it's deep. Or when you write a poetry, or when you write an article, they force you to sit and think what you're doing. Like lots of thinking before you put the pen on the paper. And this like I find out that like in the Western society, there's not a lot of stuff like that going on. They just put whatever you want.
But there used to be. And I mean, if you look at some of the art and the various types of art, which often was tied to politics, frankly. I mean, you see this in the 20th century quite a bit. The Dada movement after World War I, for example, or at the end of World War I and into the early part of the 20s. Things like the Bauhaus school,
the Bauhaus,
architecture and design, the Gropius and so on, and how those movements affected thought. And there was a lot of whimsy put into what was actually incredibly thoughtful stuff that was going on with Dada, because Dada was very much opposed to form, structure, and analysis and everything else. And it's one of the great contradictions of that entire movement, that they're an art form, but they're not an art form, right? They're trying to be whimsical, but they put a lot of thought into being whimsical. And then you see the contrast with that with things like Canada's Group of Seven, for example, and then the 8th Group of Seven member Emily Carr, who comes up with pretty solid views of the Canada that they were living in, and trying to portray those views using the styles of the day. And you know, this isn't just throwing paint at a wall and seeing how it looks. It's you're right. I completely agree with you. That there's an art carries with it a responsibility, and it's really quite important.
If you have to wrap it up soon, but let's talk a little bit more, and then finish it. Because we could go for 3 hours.
I'm having a great time.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. In my culture, if your art is not deep, if it's not, when you look at it, you don't have experience, it don't matter, right? So, but that's something just to put out. So it was a very weird experience for me when I went to art school, and people are just painting, and then there's no soul into it, right?
Art is linked to culture in a big way, and without art, your culture is in serious trouble.
So, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Wow, we've covered such a broad spectrum.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I very much benefited from growing up and living in the central interior of British Columbia. I very much benefited from being able to travel, both as president of the National Firearms Association, which I did for 12 years. That took me a lot of places. I met a lot of people across Canada. I've learned an awful lot about politics, how government works and how it doesn't work. And I like to think that I'm always a student. I'm always learning. And I try to learn something new every day. And I think if one can keep doing that, if I was to give anybody any advice, it would be to learn something new every day.
Sheldon, I have a question. You're a person, right, that there's very few people like that, but you know, that they live their life, walk the talk, and then they like to make a difference everywhere they are. Why?
Well, I believe that in my upbringing, I saw my parents were very involved in the community. Mom was involved with the hospital board politics. Dad was involved with the civic politics, also with community service. Very clubby. Would join, was an active, not just a member, but an active member of everything he joined. He was involved with the JCs, getting bear hides for the regiments in England when they needed bear skin hides for their hats. And I think I have a deeply ingrained sense of community service because of my experiences as a child. I think that's there. And I've always really enjoyed helping people. Like if someone's pulled over at the side of the road and they've got a problem, I'm that guy that stops to see if they need help. I remember in the Pine Pass in a blizzard that I was coming back from a trip up north a few years ago, just before the whole COVID thing happened, and I saw this car on the side of the road, like in the middle of nowhere in the Pine Pass, and you could hardly see the car. Like I almost came up on it and I had to go around it, and they were out of gas in a blizzard. In the middle of winter in the Pine Pass. And I had a 20-liter jerry can, and I walked over to the car. I said, I got the four ways on. You couldn't even see. It didn't matter. Cars are scooshing by us, and it's very narrow. It was very dangerous. And I asked them what was going on. They said, oh, we were out of gas. I think somebody's getting some gas for us or something. I go, well, here, I've got gas. So I poured the whole 20 liters into their tank, and the guy said, well, I don't have any money or anything. I said, just pay it forward. The next time you see someone in trouble, you help them.
If everybody did that, then the pay it forward thing, we would have such a beautiful society, right?
Well, it's the old saying that people who are concerned about the environment used to say, and I think some of them even meant it, is if you're concerned about the world, fix your own backyard. Think globally, but act locally. Clean. What was the American admiral? He said it very well. If you want to be a success in life, make your bed. Get up in the morning and start by making your bed and keeping your environment clean. I'm afraid I've fallen down on some aspects of that because I could certainly use a good house cleaning from time to time, but being single, that's a
Are you advertising you're single here?
Oh gosh.
Hey, it's good, perfect. Ladies.
Well, I'm whatever.
We'll get you in touch with anybody who wants to, know you. Right? We charge a fee.
Well, I'm sure. Zeus's dating service. No, that's
Northern BC Narrative.
That's not why we're here. That's not why we're here.
Anything else you want to say before we finish?
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity and the conversation. I very much enjoyed speaking with you, and when it's all about you talking about yourself, I guess most people kind of tend to like that. But I've enjoyed our conversations now and in the past, and I look forward to continuing them.
That's beautiful. Thank you for coming, and it's amazing to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us on this episode. It's not very difficult to be a good human being and make a difference. It's free, as you can see from this amazing example right here.
Oh, you're too kind. I am far from a perfect human being.
Nobody's perfect, but we can all try to be good, right? So,
Well, I think if you wake up and you try to do your best every day, that's probably a good start.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.